Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the new HUD. It was created by the Poker Pop-up Statistics Workshop. It consists of 4 blocks plus the additional 5th block for the opponent on the big blind when we are on the small blind. Let's look at this person here. The 4 blocks. This is the main one. It's displayed for everyone, irrespective of whether we are in position or out of position. The first line shows VPIP preflop raise, overall 3-bet, overall fold to 3-bet, and overall fold to 4-bet. The second line shows the aggression factor, when to showdown, $1 at showdown, $1 when saw flop. The 5th stat would be the number of hands if it's less than 2.5 thousand. The other blocks are positional, and the stats depend on the position of the player with respect to our own position. Let's look at the small blind and the MP here. When an opponent is in front of us, we can see the letter D, which means delay, delayed c-bets on turn and river. For the opponent behind us, it would be fold versus delayed c-bet. Again, turn and river. The second line describes the single raised pots. For opponents in front of us, those would be c-bets flop turn river. And if we have more than 800 hands on an opponent, his c-bets would be further filtered and only out of position c-bets will be displayed. For the opponents behind us, those would be folds to c-bet on each street. Again, we have more than 800 hands on this person, which means that we see his out of position fold on the flop. The third line describes 3-bet pots. For opponents in front of us, those are folds to c-bets in 3-bet pots, and for opponents behind us, those are c-bets in 3-bet pots. This means that before playing a hand against, let's say, Conductor, we can immediately see how he reacts to c-bets in 3-bet pots, should we decide to 3-bet against him. Or alternatively, look at the second line and see how he c-bets into us if we choose to call pre-flop. Let's look at the third block. This time our opponent is behind us, out of position, and his top 3 red stats would be check raises, flop, turn, river. Now the second line, first green stat, means donk bet flop, and the next yellow bets are probe bets, turn and river. For an opponent out of position in front of us, in this case Conductor, the first green stat is check fold flop, and the next 2 stats are folds to floats. This is the situation when our opponent bets flop, we call, then he checks the turn and we bet. This stat shows how often he folds, and the last stat means the same for the river. Lower line, first stat, check raise out of position, and the next 2 blue stats are folds after his c-bet is raised. That means he c-bets flop, and gets raised, how often he folds. Same on the turn, he c-bets, he's raised, how often he folds. For the opponent in position behind us, like this one Whizzle, the top line, first 3 stats are raise c-bet in position, and the 3 lower stats, bets versus our check on flop turn river. The fourth block differs a lot, depending on whether an opponent is in front of us or behind us. Let's first consider a player to the right of us. The first line shows open raises for each position. Next, you must have noted that this opponent has 4 lines of stats, whereas this one only has 3. This is due to the fact that we have many more hands on this guy. When we have over 2,000 hands on a person, his open raises are further filtered by size. The second line is small open raise, and the third line is large open raise, where small is less than 2.5 big blinds and large is over 2.5. When we don't have 2,000 hands, the open raises are not split by size. Alright, let's look at the second line. First stat, small sizing open raise. Next comes fold to 3-bet non-all-in, next fold to 3-bet all-in, 4-bet after a small size open raise, and the last one is isolation from this position. Third line, large sizing open raise, fold to 3-bet non-all-in, fold to 3-bet all-in, 4-bet after a large open raise, and fold to 3-bet after an isolation raise, 67. The last row is open push from this position. You can prove it by adding small open raises, large open raises, and open pushes. You should get the overall open raise. The second stat in white is limping from this position, and next comes limp fold, limp call, and limp raise. The small and large size open raise stats are positional, which means it considers the open raiser's position and hero's position. Therefore, these reactions to 3-bets, all in, non all in, and 4-bet is calculated taking into account our position from which we 3-bet. Moreover, when we have more than 800 hands on our opponent, our HUD is split by the number of people, by the stack size. I already mentioned the split by open raise sizing for samples over 2000 hands, and if we have more than 2,500 hands, the number of hands itself is not displayed. For the opponents behind us, this block is considerably smaller. 1.9 cold call, considering the open raiser's position and this player's position. 91 fold to open push, second row, second stat, fold to 4-bet, now empty, and the last one is squeeze. Now let's look at another hand. We're on the small blind, and all the opponents in front of us, who are in position to us, have a different third block. Now the top line are folds to our check raise, flop, turn, river. The second line, first stat, fold to donk bet. Next comes fold to probe bet, turn. And the third stat is fold to float out of position. That is, our opponent open raises pre-flop, we call. He c-bets flop, we check call. Turn goes check check. And here we can see how our opponent will fold on the river if we bet. Since we're in the small blind, we have the fifth block for the big blind opponent. Raise to limp non-all-in, raise to limp all-in, 0. Next column, fold to limp push from the small blind, fold to limp 3-bet non-all-in. 88 means fold to stab after we limp and our opponent checks. 0 is fold on the turn after he calls our stab on the flop. Bottom stats, 0 raise to our bet on the flop, and 21 bet if we check flop. If we hover over fold to check raise, or raise c-bet in position, like in this case, we will see a pop-up describing how a person plays after he raises our c-bet on the flop. This main stat here, how he continues to play on the turn, or if he doesn't bet, how often he tends to fold on the river. For the opponent who plays in position and we are out of position, we can also see how he protects against our check raises over here, as well as how he continues to play on the turn after he doesn't fold to our check raise flop. If you click on any stat in the HUD, you'll have a big pop-up which is split into categories. I will now open up another database where I created an alias incorporating several regs, and we'll analyze the pop-up on that sample. Alright, let's explore this pop-up. The first block is 3-bet. Here we can see that stats are split by stack depth. This E in front means effective stack. The three lower blocks don't have this E letter. It means that this is the overall 3-bet of our opponent with this stack, and the open raiser can have any stack size. Alright, here we have fold to 4-bet, after hero 3-bets from this specific position, and we have two charts, 3-bet non-all-in and 3-bet all-in. Here we can see how our hero 3-bets from this position against other positions when the effective stack is 0 to 25 big blinds. Let's now switch to 25 to 40 big blinds. Here we can see many more 3-bets non-all-in in comparison to less than 25 big blinds, and 40 plus big blinds. We barely see any 3-bet pushes. All the 3-bets are non-all-in. We immediately see that In the big blind, against early position, people 3-bet 1% of hands. It doesn't always mean aces kings, but it's a very tight range. Even if we look at big blind versus MP, big blind versus hijack, we can see that it's probably not a very good idea to defend that widely, and that people tend to defend after getting a 3-bet. Next comes call open, cold call. Here we can see the overall cold call, as well as split by different stack depths. Here we don't consider all-ins. These are only cold calls against regular raises, not biased by all-ins. We can see people calling less with a short stack, the reason being many more hands played by 3-bet pushing. Limps. Limp unopened, i.e. open limp, as well as regular limps. We can see significant difference on the small blind. And we also have limp 3-bet and limp call. Post-flop we have bets in heads-up limp pots and multi-way pots. Next block is raise first in. It's also split by stack depth and raises non-all-in and all-in. The lower lines are isolation raise and isolation/fold to 3-bet. Next comes big blind defense versus small blind. Here we can see fold to steal call, 3-bet non-all-in, 3-bet all-in, as well as fold to 4-bet. Below that we have our post-flop stats, fold to c-bet flop turn river, raises flop turn river, and here we have bet after flop raise. Below that we have bet versus check, which means bet versus missed c-bet, and here plus bet means that a player bets flop and also bets turn and bets river. Here in the middle we have isolating limps, as well as reactions to limp push and limp raise in different stack depths. Here we can see 3-bet non-all-in and 3-bet push to open raises, also various stack depths. Here we see c-bet after isolation, after big blind isolated the small blind. The small blind has limp called, and then how big blind reacts to this. Here we can see the big pop-up pre-flop raiser, again split by in position and out of position. I won't describe all the stats, because there are plenty. I just want to highlight c-bets in raised pots out of position, and subsequent reaction to raise, as well as c-bets in position. What is also popular is missed c-bet, and bet versus missed c-bet. Here we can see that after betting flop and turn, on the river out of position many regulars fold a lot. Here we have a big pop-up pre-flop caller, also split by in position, out of position. Here we can see fold to c-bet, bet versus missed c-bet, one showdown after raise, flop, turn, river, donk bets, and so on. Next one is stealing. We see non-all-in open raises, fold to 3-bet, call 3-bet, 4-bet, non-all-in, 4-bet all-in, a small blind limp, and reaction to isolation by all-in, by non-all-in, big blind check versus limp, isolation push versus limp, isolation non-all-in, and reaction to limp 3-bet all-in and limp 3-bet non-all-in. Below we have a detailed pop-up versus 3-bet, non-all-in open raises, reaction to 3-bet in position, out of position, 4-bet all-in, non-all-in, very detailed, split by stack size, folds versus squeeze, in position, out of position, fold to squeeze as caller, this block, very much fine-tuned. You can see all the versus 3-bet stats here. Big blind defense versus button. The upper block is pre-flop. Fold, call, steal, 3-bet non-all-in, 3-bet all-in, fold to 4-bet, 3-bet non-all-in and 3-bet push with various stack sizes. post flop, fold to c-bet, flop turn river, check raise flop, bet after check raise, bet versus missed c-bets, 42 pro bet turn, plus bet means betting after making a pro bet and after the opponent doesn't fold. Donk bets, c-bets in 3-bet pot, and in the end here we have skipped c-bets and check folds. The last block is about raising. I have already shown it. It's displayed when you hover over a raise c-bet or check raise c-bet stat, or if you hover over defense versus those. Here we can see how a person plays as pre-flop aggressor, top 2 blocks, in position and out of position, as well as 2 lower blocks about how he protects against raises and check raises. This situation comes across very often when big blind check raises against a stealing position, such as button or cutoff. Here we can see how this person check raises, as well as how he continues to play on the turn. 62% bet, and if he doesn't bet, then he check folds 72%. Here we can already see that we might want to float his check raise. Alright, so this was our HUD. Almost all the necessary stats you can see immediately in the HUD. But if you want a more detailed explanation, all the pop-ups are very informative. You can find almost everything here. You can not only use this during the game, but also to analyze regulars after the session, because after analyzing such a pop-up, you will have a very precise definition of how he plays. Maybe even your opponent himself is not aware of something you might notice here in the pop-ups. Alright, that's it for today. Good luck at the tables.